Also Subbiah Sundaram, our HYCU VP of Products, for a very timely conversation on what we all know is a pretty pernicious activity that's going on in IT in the industry at the moment around ransomware. But more importantly, the focus for today's conversation will be on 3 ways that you can actually better be prepared in the event of an attack and how best to recover. So without further ado, before I turn things over to Subbiah and Randy, just a couple of housekeeping and logistics. If you do have questions, by all means, feel free to ask them. There is the chat feature on the lower right-hand corner of your screen, as you'll see. For those questions that we aren't able to address during the course of the conversation, we will absolutely be following up directly after the conversation. A copy of this presentation will be available on Bright Talk. So as I said, without further ado, I'll turn things over to Subbiah and Randy. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Don. I think first thing I would like to do, again, thank you very much to all of you guys for joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the world you are from and listening to the session. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. The first thing I'll do was, before we go on to our session, I wanted to actually introduce Randy. Randy, I would like you to tell us about, I know Randy, we are very fortunate to actually have Randy as join us as part of this call. He has a great set of experience, and I would love to Randy to actually give a quick intro about himself and his organization. Randy?
Thanks, Subbiah. Yeah, I've been doing in this industry for a very long time. I always describe it as too long. But I work with a lot of our IT clients with Evaluator Group. And so I do a lot of projects, I answer a lot of inquiries, and a lot of times we'll do very in-depth research studies with them. And so the area of ransomware has been a highlight area recently, even for the last almost 2 years now. And I've done a lot of work with our different clients. And so I've seen a lot of these issues come up and a lot of the internal machinations in companies trying to address this problem, so that not only, like Subbiah said, is this timely, it's important. So this will be a great discussion going forward.
Thank you very much, Randy. For the folks, my name is Subbiah Sundaram. I run products for HYCU. I'm based out of our Boston office. Really appreciate you guys taking the time. Similar to Randy, I've been in the data protection, data management industry for a long time. One of the things I really am always happy about is that I get to talk to a lot of customers like you and a lot of partners who probably are also on the call. That one of the things, like similar to Randy, gives me an opportunity to get a broader perspective on the kinds of challenges different people have. And that is something we would love to share, not just our perspectives, what do we hear from people like you? Because at the end of the day, it's not about us, it's about all of us together and how do we make it better. That's something we'll be happy to share. Yeah. So let me jump onto the slides. We have a bunch of slides. As Don said during the session, if you have any questions, feel free to always put in the chat and be very happy to talk about it. Yeah. The key thing here is, I hope all of you guys can see the slides. If there is any issue, please let us know again during all the chat. Randy and I are going to do the session. The first thing, Randy and I had a long conversation around saying, what should we actually talk about and how should we go about it? We had a huge laundry list of things we can actually talk about. Then we said, you know what, let's not do that. Let's focus on a very small set of issues, but make it meaningful and, as Randy calls it, actionable by customers and people who want to listen to this particular. That is something there. Even though I say customers, I want to explicit, this session is not a product pitch. Sounds crazy coming from a vendor like us. And I'll tell you, this is not a product pitch. Our whole idea was to make sure we create value for you by actually helping you tackle this ransomware problem. And that's what our goal is. We will talk about it. As always, we are there to help you with any of the conversations, and we're very happy to do that. So what we said was, instead of making you wait till the end, we thought we will tell you what are the 3 key takeaways right at the start. The first thing, right, ransomware is top of mind, and every vendor is, I'm sure, coming to you and say, you got to invest in this and this and this and this, right? A big challenge customers actually have is, how do you decide, have you invested enough or do you need to invest more, right? It's a conversation. And it is not just within the IT department. You got to convince your CIO, the CFO, the CISO. Everybody has to be bought in the organization. The question is, how could you come up with a common terminology where all of you guys can come together so that you can actually have a very consistent conversation, clear conversation, which says, are we making the right decisions? That's something we want to. That's the first one, which we will hopefully help you during the conversation. The second one is around recovery, right? I mean, recovery is the main topic here. Within recovery, people say, oh, I have a DR and that's good enough. As many of you probably here are fully aware, DR recovery is very different than ransomware recovery, right? And in case you're looking for some tips, we will probably talk about it regarding why the ransomware recovery is different than DR recovery and some of the topics. That's the second thing we'll talk about. The third thing we want to talk about today are things around people. When it comes to recovery, people think, oh, I got to recover everything. Yes, you got to recover everything, but there's always a priority. And the thing is, a lot of times people think of their application data. They always forget some of the core services. We'll talk about how do you think about it so that you can actually plan your recovery in case you have an event, and you always will be successful in that. Those are 3 things we're going to talk. I tend to talk fast, so if I'm not clear, feel free to send in the chat. And Randy is a much more consistent speaker than me. So, cool. So this is some of the metrics around ransomware. I don't have to bore you with details. All of you guys must be getting bombarded with lots of different stats around what's going on. The thing which I always think of is that I don't like generally the broader stats. I want to look at saying what is happening in each of the customer base. A big thing which I've actually observed when talking to many of our customers, people say, oh guys, I'm in this industry, I'm not generally going to get impacted. What we keep telling people is that is not the case at all. If you go back to people say, oh, I didn't hear as much in the news in my industry. For example, let's take an example, law firms. They say, I don't see as much news in the industry about law firms. What we tell people is that there are things, big ticket items, which are very visible and publicly known. For example, let's say the city of New Orleans getting impacted. Everybody in the world knew, because why? It was the entire couple of days the city got impacted. All of the services were stopped and people didn't recognize. But a lot of times what happens in a small company or in a mid-sized organization, they try to keep it low. They don't want to make a big noise out of it because it causes issues. So that's just an example. And this happens. So we just want to say there's no one industry which will not get impacted. Everybody has to plan for this particular one. So that's something there. Before I go on, I want to actually ask Randy. Randy, I know I'm sure you talked to a lot of customers too. Maybe you want to share some things as what are some of the things have you heard from customers about how they have been impacted and so on?
Well, the ransomware is an obvious thing that we've heard of, and that typically talks about exfiltration of data and exposing it, and certainly we've seen some of that. And then the encryption of data or modification of data some way where you have to pay to get access to it, and that's very common. The ones that you don't hear as much about that are actually more interesting are the ones that are really a cyber warfare type, and they may be targeted at a particular company or a business or even an industry to try and debilitate some way their ability to continue to operate. And those cyber warfare ones are just as insidious as the things in ransomware. We tend to bundle them in the same category because of it's an attack of some type. So these are big deals, and we've dealt with a number of organizations that had those type of attacks. So we need to look at that broadly. And like you said, somebody may say that, hey, we're in an industry that we don't see ransomware. The opportunity to be attacked unfortunately knows no bounds right now.
Absolutely. That's a great point you mentioned, Randy. So one thing I'll do is, as we continue the conversation, maybe let me start I just wanted to get some feedback from the people who are on the call. So I guess, Katrina, if you don't mind, could you start the first polling question, please? I just want to hear people. So one of the things is that we just wanted to get a sense from the people on the call today. Have you been affected by ransomware in the past 18 months? Either the options are, if you can take just a minute to answer that thing, we would really appreciate that. The first one is around, have you been impacted? That's the first thing. If not, that's great. But do you know of other people who have been impacted? So if you guys could let us know, that would be great. You will see the polling on the right-hand side. And so if you guys could look at it, we would really appreciate it again. The reason is, like, as we were talking during the preparation for this session, I'll tell you, is that people said, oh, we didn't get impacted. But as you guys might remember, a lot of times it's not your direct impact, but what happens is that your partners or the people you use, for example, one of the things I'll tell you, as suppliers getting impacted, that actually impacts the organization too in a different way. So that it is, I'll probably, in the interest of time, the good thing is that 66% of you were not impacted. But if you look at it, 97 probably is like, wow, 93% of you, I'll probably end the poll right now. It's just like, it looks like 93% of you either, I mean, let's say 33% of you at least know of other organizations which are there, and 6% got impacted. It might sound like a small number, but if you imagine just the people attending this webinar today, if that's your stat, that's a significant, right? And so it's almost like 1 in 4 have the probability there. So please do watch out something there. And I think it's a great data point. Thank you very much for participating in the poll. The second thing, okay, I'll just move forward. Okay, hold on 1 second. Let me, okay, Don, could you please move the slide forward? Okay, there it is. I think it's there. If you don't know, thank you very much, Don. So what we want to do was, as I said, the first thing we want to do was come up with the list of topics. What can we do to create a common vocabulary? If you can go to the next slide, please. Sorry, the slide before. So the thing is that, as you guys know, in the world of ransomware, this is something everybody preaches to you. There are 3 parts to it. The best thing is to prevent it, right? Don't let it happen. That's the best way. But if it then, even though you say I put enough, it's almost like in your security cameras in your home. You put the security cameras, it's not there. Just because you put a lock in your home doesn't mean somebody's not going to work. So you got to monitor. That's when you put your security cameras. You got to make sure there is detection happening. Still, is somebody trying to come in? That's the second thing. The third thing is that in case somebody comes in, how do you protect yourself? That's the recoverability aspect of it. In this particular session, we will focus more on the recoverability aspect of it, because that's one of the things we will talk about. Let me actually go through before. If you look at how do people typically think about, right? Most people, from a common terminology within your organization, as I said, every team typically says, oh, we got to invest in this. And somebody will say, I got to invest more in security. Somebody will say, I got to invest more in monitoring. Somebody will say, I got to invest more in backup tools and DR tools. And there are different options come up. One of the challenges which we heard from many customers is that, when do I know what's enough? And when do I know what to invest? And let's assume even if we come up with an area where you want to invest, the question is that which area should you really invest within so that you are safe, right? That's always a debatable thing. That's one of the things we are trying to actually come up with, saying, how do we help you there? So that's our primary goal here. Randy, feel free to jump in anytime, Randy. I know I ended talking too much, so.
Yeah, I think what you're pointing out is that the conversations start out saying, we've got to do this, but it quickly gets to the point, what's meaningful? And you've got best practice over there on that. It's very interesting diagram. I end up getting lots of questions from people saying, what are the best practices? And to be honest, like you said earlier, it's different for every customer, and the dynamics involved with the people and everything. Understanding is a conversation in of itself of what is meaningful. So very good points.
Absolutely. So cool. So that's something people see there, right? So what we thought about it was, let's look at what are some of the tools people use. Prevention itself, as we said, that's a very well-known thing, in the sense that if you look at from a customer perspective, typically if you look at a CISO, or the Chief Information Security Officer, first thing they think of is, we got to prevent it. You got to get the right tools, absolutely the right thing to do, and you got to prevent it. That's the best thing to do, right? That's the first step. But as we said earlier, whatever you prevent, things are going to, the bad actors are much more active than even rest of us. So they will actually attack you much more. So then from a prevention perspective, scores, looks like somebody's puppy also want to talk. So looks like in the prevention thing, there are a bunch of scoreboards and dashboards which are there, which tells the customer regarding telling you, saying where you are, what are the things have you prevented, and what are the things to invest in. So that's the other one area. The second thing comes to threat monitoring, right? Detection. There are enough threat monitoring services in the world today people can use. And a lot of the data protection vendors, including people like us and some of our other competitors, actually provide monitoring services for you. That is something there. But the best thing is intrusion detection at the networking layer is the first thing. That's probably the best thing you got to do. The third thing, which I will say is equally important to all the other two, is around recoverability. The reason I say that is ransomware is going to happen. We already talked about it. It's not any surprise to you guys. When it's going to happen, you got to be able to recover. And that's where it comes down to. That's where we as a team, when we were talking about it, we said, like, people talk about, they say, as Randy mentioned earlier, people say have huge best practice lists. They follow all that stuff. But the question is that when do you know how good you are? Just because you read a best practice list doesn't mean it's good, right? How you implement it, how your organization is set up, the processes you have, the people you have, makes such a big difference. That's why we think you got to have a mechanism. That's one of the reasons we came up with the R score. Again, if you're wondering, I'm trying to sell a service. No, R score was developed by HYCU, led the charge. But we worked with researchers from Boston College, FireEye, Mandiant. If many of you are probably from a security perspective, they are the guys who get called in case a customer gets attacked to come and assess them and help them recover. They have huge amount of experience working with lots of customers. We worked with some of our partners like Carasoft and Startup, because again, they get to talk to a lot of customers like you who actually have experience. So that's a set of group which we started. We've been working with a lot more researchers and industry analysts on this topic. And when we came up with, we said, instead of just us looking at it, they got to get an expert like a Randy, who's from a third-party external perspective, to come and assess and tell us, saying, are we in the right direction? That's one of the things, Randy, we were very glad Randy took the time to actually assess the R score, and I'll let him talk as I get to the next couple of slides. What's R score itself? Just to give you guys, if many of you in the United States are probably familiar with our FICO score, right? The FICO score being the credit score. Credit score tells you, are you credit worthy? Same thing, the R score tells you, are you recovery ready? And it's a range, very similar to the credit score. It's a range between 0 to 1,000. It's done as a public service. Again, I want to say it's a public service. It is not a commercial thing. It's a public service. Any customer who wants can go to getarscore.org and do it. There are two, it's fully weighted. There are different areas. I'll talk about it in the follow-on, but the different areas, you can actually do that. There are two flavors. In the web, if you want to do a quick and what I call a quick and dirty version, if a quick thing, you can go to the web, get it done, and do it. That's the first step. The second thing, if you want in-depth, again, it's at no charge. You can actually give us a call. We can actually walk you through or let us know on the web. And one of our people can actually help you walk through an entire consulting thing, which actually helps you assess your organization's readiness. That's what it does. That's great to have a score, but the question people always say, what do I do with it? Right? That's the question which many people come up with. And that's where we said, let's also put in a set of recommendations. Based on your score, which areas do you need to invest in? What are the kinds of things you can do, right? That's there. If you want personalization of that particular one, always reach out and we'd be very happy to provide it. Our goal, as our CEO, Simon Taylor, likes to say, is to make sure all customers are fully protected. And that's what we want to do. And that's one of the reasons we have taken the initiative to actually run this. And last but not the least, I'll tell you, ransomware is not a static thing. I cannot say I did it once and it'll be good enough and you keep doing it. No, as you guys know, the bad actors constantly are innovating. We got to innovate. We got to get better at it. And so the one thing about our score, it's going to be continuously updated to make sure we get you the latest, we incorporate some of the latest changes in the industry and try to get you the closest, the best score you can, assess your readiness. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about it. There are 5 areas when it comes to broadly, we had a huge debate and we had like about 125 questions or something like that. We said like, wow, that's a lot of different areas, because even then we think we can do more, right? And that's when we said, what are the broader buckets that we're trying to do? There are 5 areas you got to actually do. The first one is around backup processes. People say, why do you need process? I need to do a backup. That's the most important thing. Yes, it's important. But if you don't have a clear, consistent process, it doesn't matter. Because it's like saying, I know to do good stuff, but if I don't do it regularly, it's not good enough, right? That's why you got to have a consistent process. That's the first step. The second thing is around not just the process, it's around the infrastructure. Now, do you have the right set of infrastructure to protect your data? That's the second thing. Again, it's not a product pitch. It's more of a service to help customers like you in this particular case, right? The second thing is around the backup infrastructure. So once you know you have good process and a backup infrastructure, the third thing is to say, are you keeping that data safe? Because from a recovery perspective, the biggest thing is unless you have a good data safe, it's not going to be there. So that's how do you do the third thing there. The fourth and the fifth thing are around recovery, right? How do you make sure you have the right processes in place? That's something there from a recovery perspective. And we'll talk a little more about it. So I want to just bring in Randy here. Randy, do you want to give a little insight into, I know you looked at our score, and if you can give a little flavor to people as your thoughts and so far when you looked at it.
Yeah, obviously I look at things from a skeptical perspective. That's always served me well. So I always look and say, is this something that is really hitting the right topics, or is it focused in an area that maybe it's not general enough? So I applied a lot of the experiences I had working with our clients as I went through this and said, does this cover the topics? And I went through all the questions, and there are quite a few questions. And are they clear enough that they would match the conversations I had? And I covered each of these 5 areas. I may quibble about some wording or terminology, which I do, but and that's normal. But it did indeed cover those aspects. And I was actually, you try to drill in and go in detail, and I did that and came up with some ideas and thoughts, and then tried to rationalize, does this meet everything I think of? And it did. One of the things I try to do is always look at this from a standpoint and take a step back and say, okay, now what's this really doing? What's it accomplishing? I think if you remember, Subbiah led off with this thing about getting a common terminology or conversation, and it indeed does that. Probably one of the biggest things, it brings out these different elements so that they can be discussed actively by group. It also then almost always brings out a conversation. Have we covered this area? And that's the important thing. I think the common discussion part of it and surfacing things to make sure you haven't missed something. I saw that in the value as the outcome of reviewing this. Again, I reviewed it for more detailed questions, making sure these things were covered. But then I thought at a higher level, what's this really accomplishing? And getting that conversation going, focusing the discussion in certain areas, and making sure it transcended just an IT group and covered the security people, the networking people, and the people that are in the CSO or CISO offices. And I think it does that.
Thank you very much, Randy. I just started one more poll right now, right? One of the things we wanted to hear is that, I know we are talking about our score here, but a big thing we would love to hear, like similar to Randy, there are different companies doing different things. So we just wanted to, if you could take a minute to answer, what do you guys do today to assess your ransomware readiness? That is something we would really appreciate it. Again, just take a couple of seconds to answer the polling, please. And what does your organization currently do to assess your ransomware readiness? That would be great to answer. Because different people do differently. Some people use consultants, some people use internal organizations. That's something there. Good. So there are some people who actually have their own team. What do you see, Randy, when you talk to a lot of customers? How do you see that typically?
It's interesting. Normally, people don't discuss
something maybe
things on that.
Randy's mute, so I'll probably just quickly talk about it.
Muted? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, fine, Randy.
Okay. So interestingly enough, I think people internalize a lot of this, and then they go and strategize, say what they're going to be doing. Sometimes it's interesting. You want to be careful in the discussions with people that you don't embarrass them. That, if they haven't considered something, then that doesn't necessarily get the best action or responses. And so you don't confront people with these things and saying, have you done this? But you talk about these are the things that we need to make sure we've covered, and leave it at that, and then let people report back. And that's typically the way I work with the customers here.
Thank you, Randy. So it's actually interesting. So, I mean, it looks like a good thing is more than 40% of the people actually have a team responsible for ransomware assessment, readiness assessment. That's a great thing to hear. And people talk about checklist. It'll be great to see how many of them actually also from a checklist perspective, how do they decide what are the areas to invest in? Something we should probably talk more.
Yeah, one of the things I found is those organizational teams are typically chaired by somebody outside of IT, and typically a CSO or somewhere designated, but the IT are the main people involved in doing most of the work. So it's an interesting area, and I think what it does, it talks about the importance in that this is a corporate level importance. And so you'll have an executive chairing those teams or commissioning those teams and then reporting up to them.
Great to hear. Great to hear. Cool. So we talked about what are some of the things people can do from use from a common terminology, create something common. Again, it's a completely public service. We're not trying to pitch a product here, just as a service you can actually leverage to create a common terminology so that you can use it in your organization. The second thing which we wanted to talk about was, in the case of a ransomware, when it actually happens, if it hopefully never happens, but when it happens to people, what do you do for this one? So this is an area, I'll get started and I'll probably ask Randy to chime in here. Don, I guess, are you able to move the slide? Oh, there it is. It's coming up. Thank you. The thing which I wanted to just talk about, there are lots of things we can talk about from a recovery perspective. Some of the first things we tell a customer is that the big difference between a ransomware recovery and a DR, right? In the case of DR, if you look at it, because people say, why do you need something special? It's okay, I already have DR. It's great. First thing, it's fantastic. But the thing, if you look at it from a DR perspective, when do you typically use a DR? The site is down, earthquake, a flood, and things like that. When it happens, or like a networking cut, whatever happens, you want the latest copy on the second site immediately being spun up. That's what you should actually, you want it, right? Because you want as close as possible. But whereas in the case of a ransomware, it's exactly almost like the opposite. You don't want the latest copy. Why? Because in the latest copy, if you infected in one region, in one part of your company, you don't want to percolate the second part, right? You don't want to bring the same copy. What you want is to roll back to the right point in time before the impact and then bring it back up. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you might not even know what's the good copy. So you probably have to bring it up in different sandboxes to try it out before you bring it up. That's the other thing which you need. So that's the first part I probably would say. Then again, you want the flexibility to be able to choose. So, but before I go on, I have a couple of other things I want to bring up, but I want to actually bring up Randy instead of me just talking. Randy, why don't you probably give us a little insight into what do you see from a recoverability and thinking DR was a ransomware recovery, please?
Yeah, you brought it up, and what we talk about is identifying, what is the last known good copy. And that's crucial. And that's where you use other tools to try and determine, when did this introduction occur? And do I have a copy of data right before this problem where things could have been affected? So identifying the last known good copy is probably one of the most crucial issues. And that involves expertise and additional tools to do that. Now, one of the differences I want to point out between a DR, like you were talking about, where you want everything back, versus this, which is more targeted for specific data, and besides, you want to bring back your critical things first, is that the people involved are typically different. When you have a disaster, a real disaster, a lot of your people aren't available. They may be, just isolated somewhere or dealing with their family, bringing them to safety, et cetera. Whereas when you have a ransomware, it's you've not only have your staff available and your specialists, you get outside help from those people that may have been in the planning organization, et cetera. Sometimes that takes extra time coordinating all of that, but it's a different set of people involved in a different environment, if you will, things going on. So recovering from ransomware is a different plan, with knowing that you could have different people, and then this critical thing you talked about of finding that right copy.
Yep. Absolutely right. Great points you mentioned there. So again, finding the right copy, that's number one. Number two, I'll tell you, and adding to what Randy was saying, a big challenge, I'll tell you a real incident. Actually, one of the people I happen to know is a CIO of a company in the area where I live in, and it's a large medical organization. They got impacted by ransomware. The problem was they were asked to shut down all of their operation till the FBI, because the FBI got involved and they wanted to know the exact what was happening really, right? So they said for 4 days they had to shut down their operation. The problem was they didn't have a quick mechanism to spin up on a different location and continue their business. So the business was down for 4 days. And then after that, it took them 16 days to bring up the entire thing completely back live online. That's a challenge for people, right? So one of the things we strongly recommend to people is that please plan a DR. When you plan a DR, when I say DR for ransomware specifically, ransomware recovery copy, a strong recommendation is that please consider the public clouds too, because I'll tell you one other thing which I commonly ask when I talk to customers. I see people say, do you have a DR, Mr. Customer, in case something happens? Can you actually recover somewhere? The answer is they say, yeah, we have it. That's great. Do you typically have for a significant portion of what's considered a critical part of all of your infrastructure? In majority of the cases, they don't tend to have, because DRs are expensive. So you generally think, how could I afford DR for everything? No, it's expensive. That's why the good thing is the public cloud now offers different things, which you can actually, there are technologies, which including us, people can help customers to a cost-effective way of doing a DR. So definitely would strongly encourage you to consider a DR as a DR thing too, because it allows you to not have to wait for like multiple days before running a business. So that's the other thing I would strongly encourage you guys to all look at it. That's again, hopefully gives you a little more context there. We'll definitely talk more.
Okay. Subbiah and Randy, there was a question that had come in from one of the viewers. Is there a good way to determine the optimal balance between total cost and cyber resiliency, RPO and RTO metrics, or even a good credible general calculator determining that? What's your thoughts there?
I sigh, because in reality, I go out with our clients and I always almost preach about things need to be evaluated on an economics basis, making decisions about what products to acquire and things like that. It's really about economics. This one you're asking about is very difficult, because a calculator can't anticipate the business structure and operations, et cetera, inside individual companies. So it'd be so general that maybe it's not too useful. You almost have to build a separate one for each particular customer and be very specific about their operation. It's not that hard, however. So if I was working with the customer, I'd start saying, put something together, simply with Excel, and then we can build on it from that. But it's very peculiar to particular customers, and a lot of it has to do with how many different functional elements do you have to deal with? How many could be impacted? How many is it going to take to recover? There have been a number of studies says that after a disaster, and again, this refers to major disaster, how much data do you need to get back to be in fundamental operations? And it's typically a small amount, 15%, for example, but it's the right data. And then as Subbiah said, and the right core services that go along with it. So if you start to plan and do a calculator, then it has to anticipate these things. Great segue into this section. And a calculator then is difficult to do unless it's a case-by-case basis.
Perfect. Thank you.
So, Randy, the one area where I think, for example, the R-score can actually help people to the point, Randy, there's no single calculator. I'll just be upfront with you, just first thing there. But one thing where the R-score could help you, just a suggestion there, is that if you go through different sections, as you try different, let's say different solutions, it'll tell you how your readiness is going to increase. That probably gives you a view on saying, to improve my readiness score by 100, if I had to spend $10,000, that's one thing. For the same thing, if I can invest in some other area and if they can do it for like $5,000, that's probably an optimal one. Again, there are different ways to skin the cat, but that's one of the things probably I would say is a possibility you can actually look into. Again, there's no one single magical one, but some of the options to try it out is something we can help.
You're actually bringing up, I think, an important operational point here, which we probably didn't discuss earlier, is that going through the R-score asks these questions, but they also intimate the fact that there's an importance here, such that if you do this successfully and say, I'm going to address this area, I'm going to spend some money to do that, what's that going to change? I go through it again, and you can see the effect of addressing a particular area. That's important. So I can see how to walk through and improve things. I can see where this is important. So if I address it, my readiness score, which is what this is, will be improved.
Absolutely. Thank you, Randy. That's a great insight there. So hopefully we answered the thing. If you guys have other things, please do keep putting your questions, and we'd be very happy to jump in as we go through. So Randy was actually talking about saying, how do you identify the core data? So Randy, I know you were talking about that 15%. Can you give a little more context in some of the things, and then let's talk about this.
Yeah, there's been a number of studies over the last couple of decades, even having to do with disasters. And unfortunately, we've had a number of major disasters. Probably the one that's most fresh in my mind, anyway, is the massive recovery actions required after Hurricane Katrina, because we obviously got involved with a number of those at that time. There's been a number since, but that one was widespread. And then if you start looking, it's great to look in the rearview mirror at some of these and see what happened. But the majority of them, when you talk to customers and everything, it was trying to sort out, based on the people available and their knowledge, what should they have done first. And that helps in planning for the future. And they tended to validate that 15 to 20% number. And if they'd focused on that, then they really would have had their applications in operation. Those are predicated on the fact that the core infrastructure or core services are there. And unfortunately, with ransomware, we've seen things like Active Directory and LDAP, and the identity access management functionalities all get attacked as well. So those have to be repaired and operational to get that data back and get those other services in operation for those applications. But that's the part of things to identify what needs to be done and in what order. So very important.
You bring up a good point, Randy. One of the things which when we have actually observed and customers thing, I'll tell you, is that, and as we were talking with even the FireEye Mandiant team, one thing they realized, what they were saying was, traditionally a lot of customers do, for example, they say, oh, we do the DR testing every quarter. It's true. But looks like what they typically end up testing is the core application itself failing out from A to B, which is good. But the big thing is that some of the core infrastructure required by these applications are also, is that something are you testing all the time? that doesn't look like it is happening all the time. And as Andy said, that's something the ransomware actors are getting good at. They are attacking even the core services first before the application itself. That makes it even more harder. So that's one of the reasons when you think in terms of data recovery, as Andy said, look at the 10 to 15, 10 to 20%, depending on your organization. That's core critical. That's number one. Second thing, all the dependency things which are there, which are core services, which these applications depend on, that's the other thing you got to bring up. So that's a big part there. The second thing we will tell you is that make sure you're categorizing all your data into the tiers, categories, whatever you want to call it. Every organization has a different mechanism, but definitely do categorize them. And the third thing I probably will say here is that you got to make sure what you're committing to the business is what you're applying from a data protection perspective, disaster recovery perspective, resiliency perspective. That's the third part, which is there. Alignment of the SLOs with business. Sounds too motherhood and apple pie, but I'll tell you, the amount of times we see people say, oh, you're backing up everything, we have a DR, but is it completely aligned with your business? And when the thing goes wrong, the business says, what's happening? It's not up. It's like, but didn't we already agree on what it is? That agreement has to be there with your business. So that's something I would definitely, I'll definitely focus on that. So there's a question here. It says, from your experience, I'm just picking up some relevant, some very related questions, and that's one thing. There's a question he says, from your experience of real attack cases so far, what is the typical average length of time between the first cyber data mutation event, the attack, and the time of the attack detection? In other words, how far back, time-wise, victims' organization had to clean up copy? That's a great question. The question, essentially, what you're asking is that, do people find the attack and immediately can they recover back to it? So it's within a day, can they recover? Just as long as they go back to a day, is it good enough? What it is? I'll share some of the things which I have seen. I mean, I should say, it's not a good fortune, but I had experience with customers and prospects and people like that who have been impacted. And talking with Mandy and guys, I can tell you lots of horror stories people have gone through. We have had incidents. I'll tell you the good case. The good case is at 10:30 in the morning. This is a true one. 10:30 in the morning, the company gets a notification from one of their partners saying, guys, I saw your credentials on the dark web. You might want to check. This is a true story. At 10:30 in the morning, they get, and by 1:30, their entire thing is attacked. So all they had to do in that particular case, they immediately shut down their operations, and they had to go back to like 4 hours earlier or something in that particular case, and they were up and running. That's the best case, right? But within 4 hours, they infected everything. So that was the best case. But that's the easy one. But there are a lot of other times, I'll tell you, one of our customers, essentially what happened was they forgot to change the guy who had all the super admin credentials had a weak password in one of the areas. The whole thing got impacted, right? In that particular case, essentially what happened was this happened on a Friday afternoon. And the people who were in charge of monitoring, and they had a change in the organization, were all gone. And it was actually Monday. Monday was a holiday. So they came back on Tuesday morning and they saw, and the whole thing was impacted. So in that particular case, you look at it, it's a 4-day window, right? That's an example there. I can give you one other example, which is probably a little on the other extreme side, which is some of these ransomwares are extremely smart. They make only less than 1% change every day. People say, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? They don't encrypt everything. They are so smart. They go and encrypt only 1% a day. The reason is if you start encrypting lots of data, today with the detection technology, you can pretty much start triggering something was going wrong. But these guys are smart. They only change 1% every day. So over the 90 days, 90% is changed. And that's when they trigger the thing. So it's a 90-day window they actually have. So there are people with different levels of sophistication. That's just my thing. Randy, you want to add?
Yeah, you hit a very good point about happening when the people are not watching, so to speak, or are not there to deal with things like over 4-day weekends and stuff. There are other things that are there latent, and they're triggered by something external. Those are the ones that you really worry about because you're not sure when that infection or that malware was introduced. And then some of the cases of the cyber warfare one, they're waiting for an external trigger, and they could be around for a very long time. You know, we talk about we call them sleepers, and a sleeper could be there for a year even. And so those are the ones that are the most insidious, if you think about it, because it's waiting for some type of trigger event to happen, and getting yourself rid of that can be very difficult.
Absolutely. Great point, Randy. Oh, so I know we are just getting close to our time. I think, as I said, I talk too much. So let's say I'll do just a quick thing. I'll probably say the 3 key takeaways for you guys we started with. Let's end with that. The first thing, again, there's a public service to help you with the conversation. Again, you don't have to use it. There's so many other, if you have a different method, please go for it. But the thing we will tell you is that it's a free service. You might want to just try it out. Use the getarscore.org. It's there. You can actually do a quick assessment. And then once you do that, you can actually even go much more in-depth, ask for consultation, and one of the people can go through specific, as Andy said, sometimes it's better to do specific to your organization and how you understand a lot more nuances. The easy one or the web one is like about 20 plus questions, 25 questions, 23 questions or something. The in-depth one, it's about 115 questions or something. It takes a lot longer, but it's probably gives you in-depth. Again, there's no charge to that. You can probably do that. It'll allow you to get your organization aligned. That's the first part. Second part, we talked about ransomware. Please make sure you're not looking at it from a DR perspective alone. Also, please look at it from a ransomware recovery perspective. That's there. At a minimum, I will tell you, please have recoverability at least for a week. At least for a week. That's, again, if you look at how much, there's always an expense aspect to you got to plan for, but at least for a week, please. The last thing I'll probably tell you is that, as Randy said, please try to make sure you are tiering your data so you know exactly what you want to recover and which order you want to recover, including your core services. Don't forget about it. That's something there. I know you guys have spent time with us. Really appreciate you. Thank you very much for doing that. Thanks to Randy for jumping in and providing all the insights and input there. We are here. If you have other questions, please do chime in down if there are other questions. But we really appreciate it. And you can always send us a note to rscore@HYCU and we'll be answered. This is done as a public service, not necessarily always as a product pitch thing.
Great.
Yep.
Randy, thank you so much for your time. Subbiah, for your time. If somebody was interested in getting in touch with you guys directly, what's the best approach?
I think send a note to the rscore@HYCU. That's one way to do that. That's a great question. My name, again, subbiah.sundaram@hycu.com. My name is hard to do, but if you look at that's probably there. And then Randy Kerns. Randy?
Yeah, you can just do randy@evaluatorgroup.com, or if you send it to rscore, I'm sure they'd forward it on to me. So
absolutely,
you can find me.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.